Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am Peter the Booklover, and this is Book Talk. This is where I talk about the books I recently read, and this is episode 18. This is In the Garden of Beasts by Eric Larson. And this book came out in 2011, and I'm going to talk about it. Let's talk about it. Hello, everybody. I'm Peter the Book Lover. I like to read a lot of books, and I like to talk about books, so I decided to make videos talking about the books that I read. And I'm going to be talking about In the Garden of Beasts by Eric Larson. A pretty interesting book. So let's get into this. But before I want to get into the book, I want to actually thank my audience for being here. I really think it's wonderful that you're giving me your time, and I really want to thank you for being here. So let's get into this. In the Garden of Beasts by Eric Larson. This book came out in 2011. And what this book is about? This book is about a guy that spent some time in Germany when he was younger. And because he was in Germany, he learned how to speak German and stuff. And we get to around the year 1933. This is when this book really begins. And America needs an ambassador in Germany. So they select this guy, William Dodd. And him and his family wind up moving to Germany in 1933. And in 1933, this is when Adolf Hitler, actually started to gain power. He was a chancellor at this time. And this is a couple years before World War II. And the thing about it is I'm reading this book and I already know what's going to happen, but they didn't know what was going to happen. So they get to Germany and they live really close to the building where the Nazis' headquarters are in Berlin. And they live in Berlin for a time, and as they're living in Berlin, they're hearing stories about things happening, like Jewish people losing their jobs, for instance. And Jewish people weren't able to work. They were losing their jobs, and it was getting worse and worse as it went on. It wasn't so bad in the beginning. I mean, it was bad. I mean, I think it's pretty awful that if you were Jewish that you would lose your job. That's just awful reason to lose your job. Not because you're a bad employee. You could be a great employee but still lose your place because you were Jewish. And Americans had a problem too sometimes, because it got to the point to where if the Germans were having a march or something, and you didn't do the Sieg Heil sign, and you didn't do the Nazi wave, and you didn't want to do that, you would actually get beaten for not giving the Nazi signal, the Sieg Heil sign, you know. And a lot of people would get in trouble for not saluting the Nazis and not going along with it. And if you were talking against the government, there was a chances are you could wind up getting thrown in jail and actually wind up going to a concentration camp. So one thing you learn when you read this book is that the people in Germany that supported the Nazis pretty much had to support the Nazis. These Germans, there were a lot of Germans that probably were really against it, but to avoid getting beaten, to avoid their family members getting beaten, to avoid getting locked up in concentration camps, they had to go along with the Nazi Party. And it was pretty brutal on what they would do to people. Now, this story pretty much concentrates on the father, William E. Dodd, and the daughter, which is Martha Dodd. They talk a little bit about the other son, and they talk also about a little bit about the wife. But the two main characters that they talk about that went to Germany was actually Martha Dodd gets talked about a little bit more than William Dodd. And she actually sees a lot of things because she actually has a social life in Germany, and she hangs out with a lot of Nazis, and she really ignores a lot of things at first. But there is a time to where she is hanging out in Nuremberg, and she actually sees a woman that gets shaved, and they actually parade her around with a shaved head and embarrass the hell out of her because she wanted to marry a Jew. And they actually put a sign on her saying that she wanted to marry a Jew. And that was really shocking for Martha. But at the same time, it doesn't really sway her completely. If things were a little bit different, the thing about it is if they wanted to complain about it, they really couldn't, because there wasn't much that they could do. So they were kind of forced to go along with this stuff and just kind of ignore it. Now, the whole time, William Dodd is trying to communicate with Franklin D. Roosevelt of what's going on, but he's got to be really subtle about it. He couldn't be really open about it, and he had to be really careful because he could wind up getting in trouble, even though he is the American ambassador, But things wind up progressing, and he's actually kind of starts showing dislike of this, but they don't really allow it. He kind of has to go along with a lot of stuff, so he can't really let them know how much he's disturbed by a lot of these things going on in this story. And Martha actually dates quite a few Nazis in this book, and she has some close relationships with a couple of them. She also has a close relationship with a Russian guy that's kind of like a communist, and she actually was thinking about being a Russian spy for a time, but she kind of really doesn't do this. So things progress, and then it turns to 1934, and where this book comes to a head is June 30th, 1934. A little bit before this happens, there's this guy that gives a speech, and it's a really negative speech on Hitler, and the stormtroopers are trying to take power, and they're trying to push Hitler out. And Hitler wants to stay in power, so he actually does this event called the Night of the Long Knives. And this is to where he arrests the head of the stormtroopers, and then he executes a lot of stormtroopers, and he gets a lot of them locked up, and he actually stabs a bunch of people in the back. I believe that's why they call it Night of the Long Knives, because a lot of people got betrayed and stabbed in the back. And he winds up executing a whole bunch of people using the SS officers. And they actually put a lot of people in jail. And it's a 3-day event. And they wind up winning power because of this, because they really take the stormtroopers out of the picture, and that's when the SS take over, and that's when the SS have power. And then a couple years later, the SS winds up being what they are, like the SS officers. And the Gestapo wasn't a part of this. The Gestapo was a little bit different. And about the Gestapo, they were really enforced it. They're the ones that caught a lot of people and brought them to concentration camps. And this time of life was really awful. And when the Night of the Long Knives happens, this is where William Dodd actually really gets disgusted with Hitler, and he really doesn't want anything to do with Hitler. And then a little bit later, he winds up actually quitting his position and going back to America. And there's a couple other things that happen after that. But that's what this book is really about, is about the Night of the Long Knives. And that's about it. That's my summary of this book. Now, my opinion of this book was very interesting. This is not an engrossing book, in my opinion, but at the same time, this is a very interesting book, and it's very interesting to see how things played out in Germany in 1933 to 1934, and you could see the progression of the the fascism, you know what I mean, the fascism, and also you actually get to see on how they controlled the press, and they would, they made it to where you weren't allowed to know about what was going on. They really hid things with the press. Goebbels was a really powerful tool that Hitler used to come to power. And yeah, there's a lot of really interesting things that happen in this book, and I'm glad that I've read this book. I would recommend this book. But in my opinion, Eric Larson wrote another book that I read before this, and that was The Devil in the White City. And in my opinion, that was a way better book. That book is fantastic. I highly recommend that book. That book is fantastic. It's about H.H. Holmes and the Chicago Fair in 1909, and it's really interesting, and it's done fantastically. Now, this book was great too. I really enjoyed it, but it's nowhere near as good as Devil in the White City. But at the same time, I still recommend you would read this. And it's kind of eye-opening, because a lot of people would think that the German people were behind the Holocaust. People would say, oh, there's houses like were right by the concentration camps. You can't say that these people didn't know what was going on. And I've got to argue, and I knew this before I read this book, is that not the German people did know what was going on. But the thing about it is, if you said anything, you get your mother killed. You get your children killed. They would actually lock you in a concentration camp. If you tried to speak against the Nazis would not allow it. You would definitely get in trouble. So you kind of had to act like you had to give the Sieg Heil sign and lift your hand up and say, yeah, the Nazi salute, even though you didn't like doing it. See, that's the thing. It's like listen to Hitler giving a speech and everybody's cheering. A lot of that was fake. A lot of those people did not like what Hitler was doing, because he was a madman. He was nuts, man. Hitler was one of the craziest people in history. It was nuts that he was able to go as far as he was able to go. So that's about it, man. So this is In the Garden of the Beast by Eric Larson, and I recommend this book. Okay, so that's the video. I hope this was interesting. If you thought this video was interesting, please do me a favor and give me a thumbs up. It would mean a lot to me. If you have any questions or opinions, please leave it in the comments. I would love to hear from you. And if you liked what you've seen and you haven't subscribed, please do me a favor, subscribe to the channel. I'm constantly making an effort to make my videos interesting, and I hope it's worth your time if you hit the subscribe button. I really work hard on making videos all the time. I've got more videos coming, and that's about it. I really want to thank you for being here. I am Peter the Book Lover, and I want to thank you for coming by, and I hope to see you in the next video.